when I see people who are talking about all these random tax deductions that are really illegal, talking about all these different forms of banking and permanent life insurance where they're taking a sliver of something that might be accurate, but they're using it to like act as if everybody should be doing those things. It's tough for me to not give it a side eye when I think about the fact, number one, that's dangerous. And number two, there's no consequence to you if someone else is harmed by that advice.
Real estate is not a side hustle. It's not. This is not one of those little things like, yeah, I do real estate on the side. I would never trust a realtor that's just kind of like, that's like my little, like braiding hair, that's something you can do on Saturdays and Sundays or something.
I am going to make a personal commitment to execution over perfection.
People are really like gravitating towards the people who can own their story and really stand up as their true authentic self.
If you give me a piece of music, what am I going to play? And you put that same, piece of music or elements of music in the hands of Michael Jackson, what is that going to create? Little becomes much when you place it in the hands of the master.
Well, welcome to another edition of Believers Breed, the podcast, where the aim is to promote self-awareness, self-confidence, and self-worth. This is going to be a fun conversation because it's about money. And I think we're in an interesting place in the world right now to where we need voices like my guest today. And so, man, go ahead and introduce yourself because we're gonna jump into some good information.
My name is Brenton Harrison. I'm a financial advisor. I own a firm called New Money, New Problems. And I also specialize in student loan debt and have a company that focuses on people who have 6 figures or more in student loan debt called Escape Student Loan Debt.
Is that hip hop inspired, the name?
Man, it has taken me a very long time to lean into the things that make me unique and not feeling like I need to shy away from them or make myself more like others. And when I had the opportunity to start my own firm, I wanted to have something that immediately attracted people to me based on my authentic self.
Yep.
And also, kind of repelled people who I wouldn't be a fit for anyways. So New Money, New Problems was my way of saying, there's plenty of people who might say, that's not a serious enough name for my financial advisory firm. I don't know if I want to work with somebody who has a name like that. Well, good, because I'm not that serious of a person. I'm pretty laid back. So, yeah, it's hip-hop inspired, but it's my way of saying, if you're looking for a conventional advisor, you're probably going to not find what you're looking for with me. But people from my generation, they like it, they hear it, they laugh about it, and then opens up a conversation.
That's dope, man. I like that. So, where we are right now, I'm gonna vent for a second. So there's a movie, Vegas Family Vacation, and I might be getting the exact name wrong. But in the movie, the father loses all of this money at the casino, and then he tracks down brother, family member, cousin, or something to get helped out of this financial hardship. And this family member goes into the backyard and starts digging up cash. Do I need to take my money out of the bank and bury it in my backyard?
No, not at all. I understand a lot of people looking at what's going on with banks and being very concerned, is my money safe? For 99.9% of America, you have nothing to worry about based on what you have in a regular bank. You have accounts that are FDIC insured, and that means that it's up to $250,000 per insured person per registration type. And I'll break down what that means. You're married. Let's say that you and your wife have accounts at a bank and you have a joint account, and then you each have individual accounts, and then maybe you each have retirement accounts at that bank. Well, those are multiple forms of registration. You have a registration type that's single, you have a registration type that's joint, and then you have a registration type that's called qualified funds, which are those retirement funds. each of those different forms of ownership are insured at $250,000 a piece. So collectively, you have $250,000 of insurance in that joint account per person. You have $250,000 per person in each of your respective single accounts, and then $250,000 in a retirement account. So you could have millions, depending on how that money is structured, that's fully insured. Even if the bank were to fail, the federal government would come in and provide you with that backstop. So when you see people who are worried about it, understandably so, if you look at the media, but when you actually break down how FDIC insurance works, it's not something the typical American has to worry about with their money. Now, the difference is, let's say that I work for a company, and that company has their payroll accounts that have much more than $250,000 that's in that account. If they're banking with an institution that goes down, the government's not going to save every single bank that fails. So the two big ones that we saw, Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank, that got saved, if you have a company who has all of their deposits with another small regional bank in Bowling Green, and that bank goes down and doesn't get saved, well, now that company may not be able to make payroll. And that's when you get into like the real impact on the everyday citizen.
So the everyday person, I would say, and you probably know data behind this, most people are not affected by this because they don't even have enough money in the bank to not be insured to where it would affect them personally anyway.
Exactly. If you are to the point where you have $250,000 or significantly more than that in a bank account, you probably are in a position where you could put that money to better use anyways. For the typical person, I don't see why you would have to have that much money in a regular bank account. But just even above and beyond what you choose to do with those funds, that's not most people's circumstance. So if you have $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $1,000, whatever you have, congrats to you for having it. Keep saving it, but you don't have to worry about losing it because of a bank failure.
So you have a young child. And I think, well, one, let me back up a little bit. We're in a space and time right now to where anyone can pick up, my phone is in my pocket, pick up a device, go on Instagram or YouTube, and we can listen to voices talk about money. Being someone that is in this industry, how do you qualify yourself when talking to people about money that allows them to sift through all the information that they've heard from people that oftentimes are not qualified?
I know really talented people who are completely self-taught. They did not get a certification. They didn't go and get a particular type of degree. They have the ability to digest a large amount of information, retain it, regurgitate it in a way that makes sense to a ton of people. And they build a following that way. So you have people who don't have that specific certified training, but they do have a passion and a gift to tell people real information that's helpful. I think that what I've observed with my friends in that space who are not quote unquote certified is that they have a level of caution that they make sure they don't go too far in telling people to do something or implying they should do something that should get them in trouble or could get them in trouble. So I have friends who know a lot about taxes who are not CPAs, and they would never get on the internet and tell people to do some of these things with their taxes that you see some people advising that will get these people audited, get these people thrown in jail. So to me, I look at like, what is your level of restraint? And then I also look at, if you have that certification, what's the barrier to entry? And also, what's the consequence of someone taking your advice and acting on it in terms of whether or not it could harm them? To me, if you look at my industry, I'm held to a very high standard in terms of what I say publicly. I am federally regulated. I'm locally regulated. I have an internal compliance department. If someone were to take advice that I gave and go and act on that advice and be substantially harmed, there's a consequence to me. There's a very real consequence in terms of I could lose my license, I could be fined, I could be taken out of this industry, I could be sent to jail. So that helps regulate, along with my own moral compass, what I do and don't recommend people do. when I see people who are talking about all these random tax deductions that are illegal, talking about all these different forms of banking and permanent life insurance where they're taking a sliver of something that might be accurate, but they're using it to like act as if everybody should be doing those things. It's tough for me to not give it a side eye when I think about the fact, number one, that's dangerous. And number two, there's no consequence to you if someone else is harmed by that advice.
Dang. I mean, whoever may hear this or whatever the case may be, I have heard a lot of things in that tax space about write off this, write off that. So it's funny that you bring that up as one of the examples. Typically, who are the clients that you are working with? Because what I want to be able to do from this conversation is give people something practical that they can walk away with. But I do think it is hard to create this umbrella that speaks to everybody. So I want to spend some time in your wheelhouse with, obviously who you talk to on an everyday basis, but also be able to give some quality information to someone that may not typically be your client. So who are you talking to on a normal basis, and what are you trying to get them to accomplish?
Well, there's the people that I work with individually in terms of clients, and then there is the audience that I try to serve when it comes to things like podcasts and creating content. When it comes to creating content, I am really trying to make sure that I operate in the space where people who are earning more than they thought they would earn or have ever earned before, but don't feel like they have that financial literacy to help provide them like context for what they should be doing with their money, that's where I want to operate. I want to be that free resource. I don't want it to hide behind a paywall. I want it to be like, no, you can go get hours and hours of content. And if you can't afford to work with me, you can build your own financial literacy curriculum out of the free information that I've provided. That's my goal, to be able to say, hey, even if we're not a fit to work together one-on-one, I can point you to some resources and I'm not holding back anything. You can get everything you need. You just got to take the time to put that curriculum together. Then there's the people that I work with as an advisor. Those are typically individuals or families who have the typical, 35 to 50, 2.5 kids, 2-income household, and typically high income earners who are minorities. So, black couples who might be earning $250,000 or more as a household, but they also have a significant amount of debt. And that's where the student loans come in. It is nothing for me to meet a young couple where one of, not collectively, one of the people in that relationship could have $500,000 in student loans. So when you talking to me. Yeah, come on. So when you meet someone like that and they are trying to establish a financial life using principles and financial lessons that might have been created 20 years ago when there weren't people out there who owed $500,000 in student loan debt, you can get yourself in a whole lot of trouble trying to follow either outdated advice or advice that doesn't take into consideration your specific circumstance.
So when you are coming across couples or even individuals that have accumulated this amount of debt, like what is the starting point? Because I hear people say, well, I'll never pay it off. Like, is that the approach? Or like, should we be actually making an attempt to pay off these high amounts of student debt?
It depends on the type of student loan debt in particular. There is private student loan debt that you might take out from a bank, credit union, and then there's federal student loan debt. Federal student loan debt has a number of protections that are built into how you pay it back, where it's not intended to be something that takes over your financial life, the pursuit of paying it off. So they have forgiveness programs. They have programs that base the payment off of a percentage of your income rather than what you would actually need to pay it off in full in a given period. So you do reach a tipping point where if you look at what you earn relative to what you owe in student debt, it doesn't make sense to try to pay it off. You pay towards it until it's forgiven. And there are many, many different things that you can do to limit how much you have to pay towards it until it's forgiven. And that's where student loan strategy comes into play. So you take another type of financial advice that would say, oh, don't focus on anything else until you've paid off your debts. Well, tell that to someone who owes $500,000. You can't focus on your investments. You can't save for retirement. You can't do anything else until you've paid off $500,000. They'll die and still owe some of that money if they don't understand that there are other options available.
And what happens if you die with student debt?
Student loan debt dies with you if it's federal student loan debt. And most private student loan debt dies with you as well. So if I have $500,000, or let's just say I have $50,000 and I die, I don't have to worry. I mean, I'm dead, but I don't have to worry about that being a burden to my spouse. Now, what some people will do is, let's say that I don't have student loan debt, but my wife does. I may get enough life insurance so that when I die, she can pay off her student loan debt. But I don't have to worry about her inheriting mine.
Gotcha. That's a great point. So I guess to kind of create these categories, I want to bucket this conversation. How do we increase the amount of money we have? And sounds quite simple, I'm sure. But when we think about maximizing what is in our bank account or what we're able to invest, do you have strategies that you sit down and talk to people about how we maximize income?
I do. The first focus I have, depending on how early in a person's experience I meet them, I want to talk to them about income creation. You can only budget but so far until rising costs, lack of income, lack of affordable options becomes a barrier that you can't overcome. At some point, we have to confront the fact that we no longer live in an economy where you can make a certain amount of income and survive. We can act as if in a fair world, we can get to that place where a teacher or a public servant will be able to, just off of that income alone, afford to buy a home in the neighborhood where they teach. Those days are gone. If you look in Nashville, if someone teaches at a school in Germantown and they are a 2-teacher or 1-teacher salary, unless you have grants or something like that, to expect them to be able to buy a home in that neighborhood is a fool's errand. And that's problematic in terms of how we build our cities and how we build our governments and what we incentivize. But to me, as long as that is the case, teaching people how to create an income and increase an income is vital. Teaching them about bargaining power, teaching them how to negotiate, teaching them the importance of maximizing their employee benefits. So if I'm really early in a person's experience, I make sure that they understand you have to find a way to create income wherever possible. If I'm further along in that person's journey, when we come together, then I start to look at where do we have the opportunity to take one arrow and shoot it at multiple targets. And what I mean by that is, if I have limited resources at my disposal, there are some accounts that have restrictions where on its own, it's a great place to put money, but it's not as great when you consider the fact that I have to take this $1 and I have to save for my own retirement. I have to prepare for my child to go to college and be able to assist them. I have to make sure that I'm out of debt. I have to make sure that I have an emergency fund. I have to make sure that I have insurance. If that costs $10 and I only have one, I can't afford to put that $1 in a place that restricts its use. So we talk about tools where people can take it and have more access to it or have more flexibility with how they use it, because you do reach that line in the sand where it says, we tried to increase the income, the expenses outpaced it, so now we have to do the best with what we have. And sometimes that means having a unique take on where you put your money as compared to a conventional path.
Dang, so I feel like it's so misleading to speak from the point of view that, and I'm going to use teacher, for example, because I'm in the world of education. I come from a line of educators. It's very misleading to tell a teacher that, yeah, the world is yours and you can go and buy a home here and you can have the same financial journey as the lawyer that you may be friends with And in all honesty, if we're truthful, there are gonna be a lot of restrictions financially with what that person can actually accomplish.
Absolutely. Let's just use real numbers. Let's say that a teacher comes in, they're making $40,000. Maybe after taxes per paycheck, you're talking about $1,400 a paycheck. If that teacher has children and they're in a high income area, you probably don't want to have to live 45 minutes away or even 30 minutes away. And even if you live 30 minutes away, you probably don't want to have your kid in daycare 30 minutes away. Ideally, you'd like them to go to daycare around where you teach, right? So if you're getting $1,400 a paycheck and you got to find a place to live, you probably don't want to spend more than one paycheck on where you live, right? So $1,400 a paycheck, where are you going to find that in terms of a sizable home in the city center? It's hard to find. And even if you find it, where are you going to find that's a safe place where you can drop your child off that doesn't also charge you $1,400? So that's both of your paychecks before we get to food, before we get to transportation, before we get to any of these things. So when you look at what a city values, what a society values, and that's what you're paying your teachers, what do you expect them to do? You end up with super commuting teachers who are living 45 minutes, an hour away from where they teach, or they just say, I'm not going to teach in the city, I'm going to teach in the suburbs, and try to find something that fits their lifestyle. And even if that's something that they find, the reality is they are going to be dependent on that pension coming through. They're going to be dependent on their spouse earning a significant amount of money, and that's just not right. So to me, when I look at someone in that circumstance, if they want to stay there and they're passionate about it, now we're talking about one arrow having to be shot at multiple targets. We have limited resources. We're going to do the best that we can. If I have someone who is early in their career and they're not tied to anything, and they ask me about financial literacy, financial improvement, financial investment, at some point somebody's got to be the person to come and tell them that's not enough money to do the things that you want to do. So we have to find ways to increase your earning potential.
That's good, and that's what is going to take us to the next point of what I want to talk about. So you talk about income, being able to increase earning potential, but once we have this money or whatever money that we're working with, what do we do to, one, keep it, and then how do we grow it?
Keeping it is a function of financial literacy and financial discipline. The discipline comes in to play when you do have to be confronted with the fact that either you have to be the type of person who sits down and makes a budget, or you have to put tools and software and systems around you to notify you of when you're overspending. But at some point in time, you are going to have to reach a point where you spend less than you earn. And that is a hard thing to do in some areas, depending on, again, where you live and what it costs to live there. But also just, if you're not keeping an eye on it, you can lose track of it. The literacy comes into play when you discuss things like, how do I protect my earning potential? What if something happens and I can't work? What if something happens and somebody dies or I die? What happens to my family? How do I take advantage of credit? How do I build my credit? How do I leverage credit? How do I attack home ownership? And those are things where you have to find someone who's offering financial literacy that speaks to you in a way that you can understand it and digest it. And you have to keep building that financial literacy so that you can leverage what you're building while you're building it.
All right, so we're gonna get into some of this this information. So if you don't have anything to write with, stop. Go get you something to write with, because we're gonna get you some information to use moving forward.
When you talk about home ownership, my stance, I try to do the best I can to separate fact from opinion.
Okay.
So what I'll say is this is an informed opinion.
Yep.
From working over a decade, I think this is year 14 for me, of helping shepherd people through this process. My take on it is probably a bit unique, especially if you're in an area like a Nashville, like an insert city here, where the price of housing keeps just skyrocketing year over year over year. I often encourage people to go significantly higher in terms of the value of their first home than they would feel comfortable doing.
Oh man, talk about that, because that is probably against popular belief.
Right. So going back to the example of a person who's early in their career and they're looking for a starter home, you often have access to things like first-time home buyers programs. Now, you can get into that home for a smaller down payment, and when you're looking at people buying their first home, the natural inclination is to try to get a mortgage payment that is as close to what they were paying in rent as possible. And you might have done this yourself. Hey, I'm paying $1,500 for rent. I don't want to go much higher.
Let me go to
than
$1,650.
that. That's the highest that I can do because that's where I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
So if I take a person who's in their early 30s, mid 30s, and they are doing that, oftentimes they're going to get a level of home where there are so many of them in the market where it's unlikely that that home will appreciate significantly. Because the more homes there are that are just like yours, the harder it is to see your home skyrocket in value. Why would it when somebody can go find 100 other versions of that home? So you end up with a home that does not have many of the features that you know you're eventually going to want in a house. You're renting, you say, if I want a home, I want a 2-car garage. And then trying to keep your mortgage as close as possible to the rent, you end up with a house with no garage. You need street parking. Not a problem with that.
Yeah.
But if you know that you want a 2-car garage, you might have been able to get that if you had doubled what you were paying in rent. Now hear me out. There is a line that says this is not fiscally responsible. But there's also a middle ground that says, why would I, if I am focused on income creation and I do plan to continue progressing in my career, why would I buy a house now that I want to keep for the next 10 years based off what I'm earning now? I want to project on where I'm headed and get a house that's as close to possible as of like what I really want in a home. Because it may be a little higher than I want to pay now, but if I do what I'm supposed to do, 10 years from now it'll be nothing and I won't have to move.
That's good.
But if I try to get a house that's as close to rent as possible and it doesn't appreciate the way that I want it to, now when I'm trying to go get closer to that house on the second or the third home, my home hasn't appreciated, so I can't get enough money from selling it to get into that new house. So you end up getting another house that's just kind of a little bit better than the one you had before, but now you don't have access to a first-time home buyers program. So you have to put more down on that property, 10%, 15%, 20%. So I come across couples all the time who are in that valley of decision, and they get this house, and I just ask them, realistically, how long do you think you can stay in this house? 3-4 years, 5 years tops. And then I'll say, if the mortgage payment went up $1,000 a month, go look at what you could get then. They'll go look at what they can get then. How long could you stay in this house? Oh, this is the house. Go get that house. And yes, it will be uncomfortable for a period of time. And this is not the right decision for everybody because you have some people who are in careers where they're not going to take those leaps in income. But I cannot tell you how many couples I've met with or individuals I've met with where we started the process, they get more than what they wanted to get at the time, and then not even 10, 3-4 years later, they're making double what they were making, and that payment's nothing. But I've also had couples who don't listen to me, and 3-4 years later, they're making double, and they're like, I hate this house. And now they're trying to get another house, and that price has gone up 40%. Interest rates have doubled, and they could have afforded that same house 3 years earlier.
Wow. I've actually never heard it put that way. I've never heard it put that way.
There are things, I'm getting older, but I do plan to continue progressing in terms of my income. But there are things that I have lost out on at 25, 26, 28, 30, trying to be fiscally responsible. And in reality, I just wasn't betting on myself. And at the time that I passed on those opportunities, whether it be putting money down on a rental property, taking on this opportunity, taking on that opportunity, I didn't even have kids. So I'm like, if I lost it all, who's left other than just me and my wife? And she can eat a sandwich, I can eat a sandwich. And if we're in pursuit of better things, she'll be there riding with me, you know? And when I look back now, when I have more responsibilities, the barrier to entry is higher, the cost of failing is higher.
Yep.
I kick myself because there is so much more that I could have done had I had more faith in the fact that I would continue to progress.
That's so good, man. Golly. And so when you talk about the cash flow of something like a rental property, what is that conversation like with people that want to create cash flow, want to be able to increase their income on a basis to where they know what is coming in on a monthly basis, or just being able to do more with their family that might be expanding?
Well, some people are not looking into rental property for the income. They're looking for the long-term asset. So you have people who have plenty income, and maybe they're looking for a property that they know will appreciate in value over time. So as long as it's not costing them money, it's still a good investment. You have a rental property where the renters are covering the mortgage, they're covering the insurance, they're covering the repairs. You may not be getting any more than $100 a month from it. So it's not significant income to that person. But in the long run, you have people in that house who are paying down your mortgage for you. So it's either going to be paid off at some point in time, or you'll be able to sell it and pocket those proceeds. You have others who are looking for cash flow, and that can dictate where they get the property. We've talked about Nashville. Nashville is not a great place anymore to get rentals that are providing significant cash flow because the house costs so much that you don't end up able to rent it for enough to do more than just kind of covering the expenses, unless you can go buy like a $2-3 million rental, and most people can't do that.
Right.
So if you have someone who's looking for cash flow, that might be pushing them out past Clarksville. Maybe you can't even do it in Clarksville anymore. Maybe insert your suburb here, wherever you are when you're listening to this. You might have to go a little farther out to find a home that's more affordable if you're trying to get a bigger spread between what it costs you and what you're charging someone for rent. So that's an important conversation to have. What is the goal with this property? And if someone's goal is cash flow and you look at what's available to them and that's not likely to occur, it might lead them to other opportunities to increase their passive income. And then you start talking about things like other investment opportunities, other side hustles, and trying to find a way where even if it's a side hustle, you can get as close as possible to not trading time for dollars. My mentor, I have a few, but one of my mentors is a guy named Thomas Stovall. And the way that he evaluates opportunities that are presented to him is, am I trading time for dollars? And if I am, how much are those dollars? Because I can't get my time back. So if I'm giving you my time, you better be paying me a lot of money. But anything that he looks at, he's trying to get as close to possible of that tipping point again, where it's like, this is operating and earning while I'm not working on it. And that's how I evaluate.
And so when we talk about other possibilities for investment, that I hate using the word typical, but your the person that is not ultra wealthy, the options that they have in terms of like normal consumer banking, like what does that look like? Question for you. I went to the bank and asked, hey, if I put this money in the money market, like what is it going to do for me? And this was a year or two ago. And when I looked at the outcome of what it would do, it wasn't really significant enough for me to feel like I should do it. So when you think about opportunities for people, like how are you advising the typical person to invest their money?
First, you have to have an emergency fund. Many people jump ahead.
Not in your backyard.
Many people jump ahead of that fact. And they do Robinhood or they do Webull and they're investing in stocks on their phone or whatever they're doing, and they can't put their hands on a month's expenses if there were an emergency. If you can't buy 4 new tires, you probably shouldn't be investing anywhere until you have enough in your account to buy 4 new tires. That's my metric. It's a random
I
metric.
like that example.
But it just hurts. When you gotta buy 4 new ones, it just really stings.
Yeah.
So if you have someone who's invested all over the place and they got money in crypto, they got money in their 401k, they got money here, but they also have credit card debt and they can't pull out enough cash to buy 4 new tires, we got to reset. Build up that emergency fund. After you have built up the emergency fund, I want people to take advantage of free money.
Can I pause you? So when you talk emergency fund, how much is that?
It varies by the person. It varies by the industry. It varies based on the stability of their income. For my household, I'm in a 2-income household. Both careers are fairly stable. It does not benefit me to keep more than 3 months' expenses in cash.
Okay.
Unless there's a major purchase that I have coming up, I would rather anything above that put it to use.
Okay.
Put it in the market, put it back into my business, because the likelihood of me having to use more than 3 months' expenses is low.
Okay.
If something happens to my car, I have car insurance. If something happens to my health, I have health insurance. If something happens to my house, I have homeowners insurance. If something happens to my ability to earn an income, I have disability insurance. If something happens and I die, I have life insurance. Even if there's a deductible, you're talking about $1,000, a couple $1,000. So there is value in having a few months because maybe you do have a job loss and it takes you a while. But I don't need 6 months to a year.
Okay.
There are people out there who are single or who have jobs that are not stable. Maybe they're in sales and they're really dependent on bonuses and commissions, where it might help them to have 6 months expenses. So it really depends on your circumstance. But I do think that 3 months would be my minimum expectation. Not
Gotcha.
3 months income, 3 months expenses.
Gotcha.
Once you get past that barrier, I want you to take advantage of free money. Free money could be something like a match in your 401k. If you don't put the money in, they're not going to match it. So you're leaving free money on the table by not contributing up to the match. So that's a golden opportunity to double your investment. If your employer says, if you put in 3%, I'll put in 3%, you're doubling your money by contributing to that 401k. After you have taken advantage of your free money, we go back to using one arrow to shoot at multiple targets. Many people, their only money they have in the market is in their company 401k because it's the only thing that's easy enough for them to understand. This is taken out of my paycheck every 2 weeks. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to make the investment decision. But if you have multiple things to which you're trying to contribute, like your own future and that of your children, like rental property ownership, like entrepreneurship, if you're trying to reach that point, you may not need to go further than what your company matches in the 401k, and you might need to take the rest of those funds and put them in dollars or markets where you can access them whenever you want to. Retirement accounts are great, but oftentimes if you access them before age 59 and a half without a reason like a disability, you're going to pay a penalty in taxes. So if I have something that I'm interested in doing, or I might have a need for that money before age 59 and a half, I might stop contributing at where my employer matches and put the rest of it in the market in a type of account that I can access whenever I want to.
Like what?
So a retirement account, most retirement accounts are what's called qualified accounts. And the qualified is what dictates those restrictions about how much you can contribute, when you can access those funds, and when you can do so without penalty. A non-qualified investment account, it gives you access to the same type of investments. It just doesn't have the same restrictions when it comes to like how much you can contribute and when you can access it. Now, in exchange for not having those restrictions, there's more tax implications, but there's also a lot more flexibility with how you access the dollars.
So, for those that are investing like on the consumer side, I'm going to contribute to 401k. I'm going to let my employer do what they do. But those that are going to pursue more on their own, do you recommend, this is probably going to be a little biased, do you recommend that they sit down with someone like yourself, which I'm obvious, yes. But if they don't, is there a recommendation of where we start for investing on our own?
There is, and it doesn't always include working with an advisor. It's not free to work with me, and I recognize that. That's part of why I make sure I provide a ton of free financial literacy content, because I recognize that everyone won't be able to afford my services. Another reason that I provide that financial literacy is for those who cannot. They need to find a resource that speaks to them and that they understand. So I would say that the first thing to do is to find someone who teaches financial literacy content in a way that you can understand, that is not trying to give you a way to get around the hard work and the discipline and give you those quick fixes. So when you talk about that consequence of being wrong, don't go find someone that speaks to you because they told you can be a millionaire in 3 months. Don't find someone that tells you that you don't have to pay a dime in taxes because of this weird tax law, and their interpretation of it leaves something to be desired. Find someone who's teaching you the basics of financial literacy and follow that resource. After that, I want to make sure that you are implementing things that are protecting your ability to keep growing. And oftentimes that's insurance. It's life insurance for your family. It's disability insurance for your earning potential. So the things that keep you going and protect or shield you from a level of risk, you need to implement those items. And then you need to make sure you do the same for anybody you're leaving behind. That is often the last thing people implement, an estate plan. And you come across so many people who have been burdened by someone's death financially and don't have the freedom to grieve that person in the way that they should be grieved because they're dealing with affairs that that person could have handled while they were alive. So you need to, while you're building, not wait until you have built to determine who gets what and how it should be dispersed. Whether you think you have an estate or not, you need to put those things in place.
And when you talk about estate planning, should this be all inclusive, like fully pointing out exactly like what you want to happen upon your death, to leave little to no room for those that want to interpret it one way or another? Or should it be more of like blanketed?
Some things can be blanketed. This watch cost $80. I don't need to put in my will who gets this watch. Unless there's some sentimental value to it, I can, in a will, give general instructions for how things should be dispersed, and I don't have to write down every single thing that I own. But like you said, I have a young son, and I do have very specific instructions as to who should manage any money that's left to him. I have specific instructions as to when he can access that money without a layer of separation. So in my will, he has to get beyond the age of 18. He's going to be 25, 30 years old before he can access the money that I leave him freely without having to go through someone else, like my sister or my brother-in-law or my wife if she's alive. Those things are very important to me because a child under the age of 18 or whatever the age of majority is in your state cannot legally make decisions on their own behalf when it comes to money. So if you do not have instructions that you leave behind, you're leaving it for the court to decide how those funds are managed and who oversees them. So you might have the person in your family who you love to death, but is the worst person in your family with money. And the court doesn't know that. So they may say, we're going to give it to auntie such and such, and they'll be in control of it. And 5 years later, that inheritance is gone. Even if it's not something in terms of leaving money behind, when it comes to your last will and testament or your advanced medical directives, if something happens to me and I'm on life support, I do not want my wife sitting there having to determine whether to keep me on life support or not. I make that decision while I'm alive. Wait X amount of time. If I'm not showing signs of brain activity, pull it. I don't want that on her. I have seen, even for people who are broke, get into a health situation,
just
on
keep it
life
going.
support, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, and ruin themselves financially because of the guilt of, I don't want to be the one that pulled the plug on my dad. And you can give somebody those instructions where they don't have to carry that with them.
That's good. So where do people start to be able to create that level of estate planning? Like, who do you go to? How do you find them?
I prefer that they find a professional in their area where they can sit and talk to a person. Something is better than nothing. So when you look at things like Rocket Lawyer, there's another one called Trust and I think it's called Trust and Will. I'll give you these resources if you put them in the show notes. There are resources out there where if you have a few $100s and you're just trying to get something, that's better than dying with nothing. And they even in many of those cases will build in the opportunity to pay a little bit more and have access to an actual attorney. So regardless of your circumstance, if it's a few $100s, use those resources. If you can afford more, find an attorney that you trust, because it is an awkward thing to sit and talk about death and what you want to happen in end of life situations. But your lack of comfort in talking about them does not strip you of the responsibility to plan for them.
That's good. So I want to bring us home with a couple of thoughts. Stock market right now. Do you recommend that we be a little less conservative at this point, where people say things are on discount, so to speak, or do you think that we should keep the normal flow and the normal cycle of how we have invested historically?
I'll back into that answer.
Okay.
When the stock market's falling, what's one of the first things that you would ask yourself?
Why is it falling?
That's one. Plenty of people ask, should I take the money out?
That's true.
Should I stop investing? The first rule of investing is buy low, sell high. So when the market goes down, what you should be doing is buying. Instead, what most people ask themselves is, should I pull out? So you would be selling low, and then you're going to put money back in when you see it going up again. So you're buying high. So you're defeating the purpose of the first rule of investing. There are people who are investing money that they can't afford to lose. And that's why I talk about having an emergency fund first. Because you have to build yourself to the point where you can evaluate investments using logic instead of emotion.
Talk about that.
If you're investing money that you can't afford to use or lose, it's all emotion. It goes down, I need that money.
Panicking. Scrambling.
If you have a firm foundation, if it's money in a retirement account and it goes down 15% last year, 20% last year, not fun to watch, to be sure, but you don't need that money for 25 more years. Why would you act irrationally or act too fast with money that you are decades from actually using? Plug more money in. If I see the market going down and I have that firm foundation, if someone asks me what they should be doing, I tell them you should be investing more money as consistently as you can so that you can benefit from these hopefully depressed prices, which you don't even know if they're depressed because we don't know what the future holds.
True.
But when I see people who have investments with me and the second it goes down 5%, I want to talk about what we should do. I'm not the right person for you. I don't have the right temperament for you because I'm going to come and tell you, think about when you need it. Think about whether or not you need it now. If the answer is no, I'm not going to jump every time this happens, and neither should you. And if you want somebody who's going to jump every time it happens, then you are reacting in a way that's not good for your future interest. When you have people who work with an advisor, especially if that person has some authority in their own realm of influence, there are some people who think that working with an advisor means that that person says yes to the things that you want to do at all times. My role as an advisor is, whenever possible, to help you attain the things that you want to attain. If there's a goal and I can help you reach that goal, then I'm going to do the best I can to help you reach that goal. I'm going to tell you the resources that would help. I'm going to structure my advice in a way where we're building towards that objective. But my job is not to tell you yes. So if something comes up and I know this is either a goal that's not realistic or the way that you're pursuing this goal, it won't get you there, I'm going to have to stand on my morals, my principle, my experience, and say, no, this is not the way, if you want to reach your objective, that it's going to happen. Or that's not a realistic objective, but let me tell you what is and how we can build towards that. And those are tough conversations.
I was just about to ask, like, does that get heated? Because when you talk about people and their money, we are tied in a way emotionally, especially a lot of people from our culture coming into money for the first time.
Yeah.
And I go and tell my financial advisor, I want to do this, and he tells me no. I can imagine that could be alarming and create this thick environment that you probably can cut.
Well, early in my career, I probably wouldn't have said no. Because you're worried about losing the client. You're doubting your own advice. There are people who I work with who make substantially more than I do. If they say they want to do something,
they're used to you saying yes.
Not only are they used to saying yes, but I'm sitting there early in my career thinking, shoot, they make more than me.
Yeah.
So maybe they're right. The deeper you get into a career, the more you invest in attaining a level of expertise, the more agency you have in standing on what you know is right. And when I have someone, they could make 10 times more than me. It can get tense if they're saying they want to do something and I tell them, here are the ways you can do it. I don't see any of those things happening. We need to pursue something that's more attainable. You have to trust the advice that I give. You don't have to follow it. But a big part of establishing a relationship with an advisor is understanding how they think and trusting that they have your best interest at heart. So if I have that relationship with the person, it may get tense, but I can articulate why that's my stance. And hopefully, if it's a relationship that I built the right way, they know that I have their best interest at heart.
That's good. And so as you think about like the future of where financial advising is going, do you see that these relationships are going to continue to grow? Companies will grow? Or do you think the agency that people have on these little devices that we carry around will dilute that industry in a way to where people feel like I don't really need it?
No, not at all. It'll always be around because it's a topic that's so confusing where even if you have all the information at your fingertips, sometimes you just need someone who's experienced enough to help you sift through it. So you can get life insurance on your phone, you can get a will on your phone, you can invest on your phone. Anything you need to do, you can get on your phone, you can find it on your own. But how do you know what's the right structure? How do you know how much to purchase? How do you know how much to invest? How do you know where to invest? Unless you either have all the time in the world to find out that information on your own or you have a guide. So there will always be value in having a guide. What I do see happening is a certain level of financial advice becoming commoditized. And you're already seeing that, where something that 5 years ago a person might have charged $5,000 for, there are companies who will offer that for $87 a month. And to me, that's fantastic. You will not catch me complaining about there being more avenues for people of various means to have that guide. I think that only strengthens the proposition of someone like myself who goes a layer deeper than those organizations, because now I can be less worried about turning someone away who does need help but just can't afford mine.
Gotcha.
So I love it when I can say to someone, I don't love it that they can't work with me, but I love it when I have another tool they can use
can point them to.
to provide them similar resources at a lower price point.
Gotcha. So here recently, I've seen New Money, New Problems podcast. Tell us about it. What are you doing?
New Money, New Problems podcast, it aims to reach the objective that I told you of taking people who are making more than they've ever made before, who have not had anybody by their side to help them navigate that, to give them those resources. There's such a lack of understanding, specifically when it comes to minority wealth, of what earning a high income gets you when it comes to financial literacy. So often we looked at our pastors, our engineers, our attorneys, our physicians, and we assumed that because they earned a lot, because they had positions of authority, that they automatically knew what to do with that money when they got it.
That's good.
I am from a high income earning household. My mother's a realtor. My dad is an emergency room physician. And I saw firsthand the consequences that came from them being handed more money than anybody in their family had ever been handed, but nobody that came behind them to say, and here's what you do with this to not mess up your credit. Here's what you do to not owe taxes. Here's what you do when it comes to buying a car or buying a home. So I want to strip down all those assumptions and provide a level of literacy that may seem elementary if you're thinking about what these people are earning, but I know it's not, because I know those people. And I know that they are just as much in need of understanding how mortgages work as a person who earns $30,000. So I want to help both. I want to have content that can help the person earning 30, but can also take away that guilt or that shame from the person earning 300 when they don't know that advice.
Needed, man. I think you are a necessary voice right now. Very necessary voice. As you think about people and their pursuit of where they want to go with their goals, I'm going to blow this balloon up, and I want you to write down one word or one phrase that you feel like stands in between people and those goals. So wherever your mind goes, obviously you're a financial guy, and so it may be something financial. But I'm going to blow it up on this balloon, allow you to write it, and then we're going to pop it and take the air out of it.
I can only do one word.
One word, one phrase. Context. I don't know if you guys can see it, but talk to us about it. What do you mean?
In so many areas of life, whether it be social media, mental wellness, finances, we have created a culture where we make judgments or we decide how we should act based off of a lack of context. I'm looking at someone else's relationship and I am judging how my relationship should be based on a limited amount of information that I see online. When it comes to financial literacy, I'm looking at a resource, not understanding the context to their financial situation, and they don't understand the context to mine, and I'm using that to make decisions. When it comes to mental health, there are things that I see others doing, and when I can't do them, it affects me mentally. And the way that I deal with it is based on a lack of context. There are so many scenarios that I see where as I mature, I am typically a person who makes snap judgments. Time and context have taught me that it's often better to look at what a person's doing and whether it makes me feel good, bad, or indifferent in the moment, to not have that be the enduring impression. There's people who I see who I believe may be doing quote unquote better than me. And I can internalize that if I don't keep in mind, I don't know the context of their situation. There are people who I may judge in terms of a snap judgment, and not only do I not know the context of their situation, if I were in that same situation, I might do the same thing. I might make a worse decision, but also the context that comes with how many bad decisions have I made in my life where I'm not in a position to do that. So to me, context is something that our society is missing because we just don't wait. We make the judgment based on the first limited piece of information we see, and oftentimes that doesn't serve us well.
That's good, man. That's good. So context. So one, are you taking clients right now?
Depends on when this is released. So it's April 2nd when we're recording this. We're closed to new clients until June 1st.
Okay.
But after June 1st, we are taking new clients.
So how can people find you, follow you, follow the podcast? Talk to us.
The podcast is New Money, New Problems. You can listen to it wherever you find podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We also have a student loan debt podcast that, for compliance reasons, I have to share. It's separate from my business as a financial advisor.
Okay.
But that's the Escape Student Loan Debt podcast. You can find that as well wherever you listen to podcasts. The firm is also newmoneynewproblems.com. And if you're interested in becoming a client, you can click on Request a Meeting. It'll take you through the questionnaire that we ask all of our interested parties fill out before we meet with them. But the biggest thing to me, because the number of people that we work with is limited, because we have limited time, is we try the best we can to provide resources that everybody can benefit from. And the first place to find them is on the podcast.
Awesome, man. I appreciate this, and keep up the great work. Like I said, you are a necessary voice, man.
I appreciate it. You as well, man.
Cool deal.